I've got a week off work coming up and I've decided it's finally time to finish redecorating the bedroom. I'm going to be building a small TV table. Think of it like a shelf with some legs. I've got this really nice piece of live edge ash that I'm going to use as the tabletop, and I've got some 42mm steel tube that I'm going to use for the legs. I'm going to start with a chisel to take off these big chunks of bark and then finish it off by using a nylon brush in my drill, which I'm just going to use to clean up the rest of the edge. I went into this project feeling pretty confident that I'd be able to knock it out fairly quickly, as I'd made a few of these tables before. All that changed when I came to thicknessing this piece of wood, but if you stick around you'll see what happens in a few minutes. I've got all the bark cleaned up now and removed any dirt with the nylon brush. I did take a little chunk out here when I was using the chisel to remove the bark, but I can probably sand that down with some of the foam pads to preserve the edge, but we can get to that a bit later. I want to get the slab flat on both sides. Normally I'd run it across my benchtop surface planer like I did in my previous video on the coat rack. I'll put a link to that down in the description if you haven't seen it yet. But this slab's a lot wider and it won't actually fit across my benchtop surface planer, so I'm going to have to use my thicknesser. I've used this piece of melamine to extend the bed of my thicknesser. I've also clamped it down to some wooden blocks and screwed it into those blocks, so hopefully it won't move as it goes through. This will give it a nice flat surface reference as it makes its way through the thicknesser and should eliminate any snipe. Extending the thicknesser's bed worked pretty well. There was still a bit of snipe, but not as bad as it would have been without the extended bed. Just a loud bang just as I took the board out, that last pass. And I've opened up the side and it looks like the chain's all bunched up and one of these cogs has come off. This was also sat inside behind the cover, so I'm guessing it's unscrewed itself over use. This piece has just fallen out. Okay, so that's where that piece has come from. I'm not sure what was meant to be there. Well, obviously this, but I'm not sure what that did. So I've had a bit of a look online. I'm still not 100% sure what this bit is for. I'm guessing it's there for a reason, but I'm gonna put the side cover back on after giving it a bit of a clean and see if we can finish thickness in this slab. So I just started running the slab through the thicknesser again and noticed that the feed rollers weren't moving. I've opened it up to have another look and I can see that one of the sprockets that's attached to the feed rollers is completely stripped out. By comparison, this is what the other one looks like, and you can see that it's got this oval shape, whereas this one's completely round apart from this tiny little bit at the front. So I'm going to have to order a new one from Makita. I'm not sure how long it's going to take to arrive, but in the meantime I can start cutting the legs down to size and getting them ready to go. This is the Evolution S355 CPS metal chop saw. It still amazes me after all the time I've had it at how easily it cuts through metal. It's literally like a knife going through butter. This is just the standard blade that came with it. I don't know how many cuts I've got on it now, but it still goes through the metal as quickly as it did when it was new. So I've cut the legs to size. I've also knocked together this little jig just so I can slot the legs over after they've been painted and they can stand upright while they dry. Next step is to paint the legs. I'm going to use this Hammerite satin black metal paint. According to the back of the tin, I only need to put 2 coats on. I've started using this paint instead of spraying it on. It's a bit more expensive for the tin, but it lasts a hell of a lot longer. With the spray can, I'm lucky if I get 2 projects out of it, but with this tin, I think this is my 5th or my 6th project, and I've still got about half the tin left. It's around a month later now. The new sprocket arrived earlier this week, so let's get that in the thicknesser and see if that fixes the problem. I picked these sprockets up from powertoolspares.com. I'll drop a link down below. They're only £1.20 each, so I bought 3 just in case this happens again. So it turns out the chain tensioner isn't the easiest thing to put in after the chain's in. finished planing both sides. The thickness have worked perfectly. I'm really happy it was such a cheap and easy fix because it could have been a hell of a lot worse. There is a bit of snipe on one of the ends, but I do need to cut this down to final size anyway. I love the fact this miter saw uses a shadow line instead of a laser to line up your blade. It makes it a lot easier to see where you're going to cut even in bright daylight. One of the things I really don't like about this saw is how poor the dust collection is. This was hooked up to an extractor. I made 2 cuts and there was all this sawdust that was just thrown onto my workbench. The tabletop's now cut to final size. The ends I've just cut are nice and square with the back of the table. To soften them, I'm going to put a 3mm round over on them, on the top and the bottom. I'm going to leave the back and the front as it is. Just want to soften those sharp edges over. If you saw my last video and were wondering if I remembered to test the height of my router bit on a scrap piece of wood before working on my actual workpiece, I've just tested it, everything's good. It's now time for every woodworker's favourite part of a project. I'm going to start with some 120 3M Xtract Cubitron paper and work up to 180 before I apply the finish. I'll also do a bit of hand sanding as well on the roundovers we put on and on the live edge. You can see here that I didn't fully plane the underside of the table. I wanted to retain a bit more thickness and I was only really concerned about getting the ends parallel with the top where the legs connect, just so the legs come out at a 90-degree angle. I'm just hand sanding the roundovers I put on and the live edge. It's really easy to flatten these areas out when using a random orbit sander, so I prefer to just be a bit more delicate with it and hand sand these areas. I'm going to use these wall plates to connect the tabletop to the legs. I think the idea for these plates is that they connect to the floor or a wall and then you put the pipe into them and it creates hand railings and things like that, but they're also really great for connecting tables to legs. So I need to mark out where they're going to go. I've also got this small piece of angle iron which I'm going to use to attach the tabletop to the wall so it can't pull forward. It's going to have a TV on it, so it needs to be secured to the wall somehow in case the cat tries to climb the TV like it likes to do. So I need to mark out where I'm going to drill the holes. I'm going to be using threaded inserts and some bolts to hold it all together. The threaded inserts work really well because it means you're not stripping out the wood every time you're taking it apart. They're just metal screwed into metal. You can unscrew them and put them back together as many times as you want. They're really good. They're really easy to install and they last a long time. I'm using a 10mm brad point bit in my benchtop drill. I've set the depth stop to 15mm just so I don't break through the top of the table. I've got all the holes for the threaded inserts drilled now. I've also countersunk them so they sit nice and flush. I'm going to start installing them by hand and I'm going to use a little bit of CA glue on each one of them just to give them a bit more holding power. Ideally, I'd like to use a clear CA glue for this, but I didn't have any on hand, so I had to use the black stuff I had in the cupboard. It shouldn't be a problem because it's only on the threads, and these are going to have the wall plates covering them anyway. I'm using a maroon pad just to sand down the paint lightly, just to get it all even before applying the second coat. As I said at the start of the video, I've made a few of these tables now. I think this is the 4th one and one shelf that was quite similar. But looking at all those, I only finished one with Rubio and that was my favourite finish out of the poly I used, out of the Danish oil, out of the beeswax and mineral oil. The Rubio just looked best, so I'm going with Rubio on this one. I don't know what it is or if it's just me, but I love the smell of this stuff. I always apply Rubio just by pouring a bit on, using a plastic spreader to spread it all out and then buffing it in with one of the white buffing pads on my random orbit sander. When making tables like this, I always start on the bottom and then flip it over and repeat the process on the top. After I finish buffing it in, I'll let it sit for a little while and then wipe off any excess with a cotton rag. I bought this piece of angle iron to attach the tabletop to the wall. It came pre-drilled with these holes, so I just used the locations of these outer holes to mark onto the tabletop where I need to put the threaded inserts, and the same onto the wall behind me where I need to put the wall anchors so I can attach everything together. I installed the wall anchors off camera. It was just the same process I used in my last video when making the coat rack. I've already assembled both legs. It's simply a case of slotting the tube into this wall plate here and tightening up this Allen bolt, and I've just knocked a plastic foot into the bottom of each of the legs as well. This is where those threaded inserts come in really handy. It makes it so easy just to tighten the bolts down without having to worry about popping a screw through the top of the tabletop or stripping out the wood. Onto the final installation now. I'm just tightening down the screws to hold the TV table against the wall using that piece of angle iron and getting the TV in place. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Hit the subscribe button if you like content like this, and I'll catch you in the next one.